And welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Funding the Work, Designing Competitive Grant Projects. This is our first SSA annual meeting workshop, and we're so pleased to have you all here. I am Lily Carroll. I'm the chair of the Professional Development Committee, and I will be moderating today's session. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping things that we'd like to go over, and they include that we'll be recording this session, and the recording will be posted to the SSA and NHPRC video platforms, but we'll only be recording the presentation portions. And so if any portion of the recording you as a participant are included, we'll make sure to edit that out, or we'll reach out to you for permission. So there will be points where you're encouraged to unmute yourself and have a discussion. That will be paused during the recording, so no worries about that. But if you have questions throughout, and you're more than welcome to use the chat to ask questions. And if you have any questions about the recording or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat box, but also you can just chat me privately or in the open chat, however you like. So let's see. So we'll utilize the Zoom chat throughout the session today. So if you have any questions or anything like that, please use the chat. Our lovely workshop trainer, Nancy Melly, encourages people to unmute at certain points throughout and have that discussion. So as I said, that won't be recorded. And now I am ready to introduce today's workshop trainer, Nancy Melly. She is the Director of Technology Initiatives at the National Historical Publications and Records Commission at the National Archives and Records Administration. So Nancy, thank you so much for presenting this workshop. We're super excited, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I love doing this. I love talking to people about possible projects and helping them make the most competitive application and project that they can to give them a better chance of funding in the long run. So that said, I have to get my glasses because I'm that person now. Let's see. Let me start this with a caveat. I've never done this workshop virtually, so please forgive me if I make any critical Zoom errors. Also, please forgive my dog Eloise if she interrupts us. I have no way of keeping her out of this room. Literally, there's no door. I want to acknowledge, she heard her name. She's also very good at staying out of sight of the camera, but interrupting me anyway. So I want to acknowledge that I am presenting from the ancestral lands of the Wampanoag people. And I want to warn you that I talk very, very quickly. It just gets worse the farther north I get. And since I'm in Massachusetts right now, I am going to talk very quickly. Please interrupt me and ask me to slow down if I'm speaking too fast. Put it in the chat and Lily can interrupt me. Do not hesitate to interrupt me. We will be pausing for questions, or rather, I will be pausing for questions, hopefully on a regular basis, in order to prevent having to pause the recording. I will ask you to put those into chat, and Lily, since she has already agreed to be part of the recording, can give those to me and I can answer them at regular intervals. I am focusing solely on the NHPRC application process today. That said, a lot of what I talk about can be translated to other funders in terms of how to prepare a competitive application. Now, finally, about me. I have been an archivist for a little over 20 years. I joined the National Archives in the year 2000 as a processing and reference archivist in their Born Digital custodial unit. And I joined the NHPRC in 2010 as a program officer, which position I have held for the last 10 years. I have run a variety of programs over that period of time. Right now, I have right now I'm running, I guess I should say, the Access to Historical Records Archival Projects program and the Public Engagement with Historical Records program. Is that everything? Yes, okay, excellent. So what we are going to be doing in the next 4 hours, I'm going to give you a very quick introduction to NHPRC. I'm going to spend about 45 minutes talking about the elements of a competitive application for NHPRC. We are going to take a break, and then we're going to have a discussion. Hopefully you all did have a chance to read the applications and budgets that I sent you and took some notes on them. So that we can have a real in-depth discussion about thinking like a reviewer and what the reviewers are looking for in our applications. And then I'm going to talk about what happens after the commission meeting, after the commissioners make their recommendations, and I get to say to some of my applicants, congratulations, you've been offered funding. We'll take another break, possibly after that, certainly stop for questions. And then we'll start talking about what you in your repositories should be thinking about and looking for as you start the process of asking for funding from a federal or private grant making entity. But I do want to ask one question first, and if you all could put this in the chat and Lily can tell me later, how many of you have applied for funding from NHPRC? And have you ever served as a reviewer for us? Actually, I'll make an addendum to that. Have you ever, are you interested in serving as a reviewer for us? Because if you are, I will contact you in October or November of this year, I promise. Right, moving on, finally. NHPRC at a glance. So while NHPRC was established in 1934, we didn't start making grants until 30 years later. After President Truman, upon being presented with and presumably reading the first volume of the papers of Thomas Jefferson, said, and I quote, he urged the commission to discuss the needs of the profession, particularly in regard to historical publications. So that is when we started funding digital editions, not digital editions, documentary editions. I'm moving way far ahead of myself there. Documentary editions. About 10 years after that, we started funding archival work. So processing, creating finding aids, cataloging records. And one thing I want to say, although it is really neither here or there at this point, is that my colleague Daryl, who is the director for publications, and I are finding that documentary editions and archival work are merging in the digital humanities space. Okay. So currently the commission is a 15-member board. It includes appointees from federal agencies, including state, DOD, the federal judiciary, the Library of Congress, and both houses of Congress. It also includes a couple of presidential appointees and several professional organization appointees. Those professional organizations are SSA. Sorry, not SSA. We wish we could accommodate all of the regional archival associations. SAA, Nagara, AASLH, and then also the Association of Documentary Editors, the Organization of American Historians, and the American Historical Association. So my day-to-day activities as a staff member for NHPRC include talking to potential applicants about their project ideas, which programs those projects might fit into, and if they don't fit into one of our programs, where else in the grant funding space there might be a program that would be more suited to what they want to do. If I don't say this enough, I apologize in advance, but do not put together a project to fit a program. Figure out what you want to do and then find a program or a funder who will fund that. You will never get what you need out of a project that is designed purely around a funding program. You'll always end up compromising something that doesn't fit into your repository's regular way of doing business. In addition to talking to potential applicants, I manage the application process for 2 programs right now. That process includes communicating with the applicants, putting together peer reviewer panels, as well as participating in the discussion by the commissioners about which applications to fund and which to send back to the applicants for refinement and revision, or if it just doesn't fit, to say, we're sorry. And finally, I work with our grant recipients to make sure that their projects are progressing in a timely fashion and they are getting done what they said they were going to get done. Okay, so now we're going to get into your job as an applicant and how to think about preparing an application for the NHPRC. Right, so digesting the program's rules and instructions. Believe it or not, they are not all in the announcement. So if you go to the NHPRC website under announcements, we always have both the ones that are currently open and the ones that have just closed. If you clicked on any one of those, they will give you instructions such as the narrative should be no more than 20 double-spaced pages in 12-point type, formatted for 8.5 by 11 paper with standard margins. But it won't tell you, although it will tell you where to find this information, how to fill out the NHPRC budget form. So there are 3 places to look for, at least in the NHPRC sphere. Application information. The first is the announcement. The second is our what we do fund and do not fund page. And because NHPRC is 1, part of the National Archives, and 2, focused solely on, at least in the programs I run, the archival work, there are a couple of things that you cannot do in an NHPRC funded project. You cannot work with federal records. That is the purview of the National Archives. Therefore, we can't fund that. If you can prove to us that, well, they may have been federal records at one point, they are not permanent in the federal sphere, but you have them for a different purpose and they are permanent in your world, then we can consider that application. Another thing that we don't fund are projects that include periodicals, anything that's been published, because they are not truly archival in NHPRC's records world. There are multiple copies or potentially multiple copies. They may not be great copies. They may be very, very poorly done microfilms, but there are copies. Information. The other place to find information is on our applications instruction page. That will give you information about our budget and our budget form and what needs to be included in that. It will also give you information about registering for SAM, the system for award management. It's a federal system that every applicant has to be registered in. It'll give you information about grants.gov and where to find our space in grants.gov and how to submit your application. I will probably also say this repeatedly. Please do not wait until the last minute. SAM registration requires a DUNS number. Having a DUNS number takes at least 2 weeks, if not longer. SAM registration itself can take a couple of weeks. Registration in grants.gov is a much quicker process, but the system can slow down if it is a very busy day, since they handle every grant application for every federal grant-making entity. That includes Department of Education, that includes Health and Human Services, that includes NEH, IMLS, the National Science Foundation. So do not wait until the last minute. I beg of you, please do not wait until the last minute to start preparing and to submit your application. There is a workaround, but that requires you to have a grants.gov trouble ticket number and to contact someone on our staff before 3 p.m. on the day of the application deadline. Now that I have said that, and I hopefully will say it again, you have to determine whether the first thing you have to do is determine whether your organization is eligible. So for NHPRC applicants, an eligible organization is a nonprofit, a US registered nonprofit, an academic institution, a state or local government entity, or a federally recognized, a federally acknowledged or state recognized Native American tribe or group. If you are, yes.
Oh, Nancy, we have a question in the chat, and I don't want to lose the context. So the question is, do you have to do that once or for every submission? So I guess, do you need a SAM or a DUNS number just once and it's good, or every time? So if I misunderstood the question, please clarify in the chat. But
no, DUNS number you only have to get once. SAM registration, I think, is good for 2 or 3 years, and then you have to renew it. But for our purposes, as long as it is active at the time of your application, we're good. We will ask you to continue to maintain it during the award period, should you be given a grant. But in some larger organizations like universities, some of your bigger historical societies, and many of your state archival organizations. All of this is taken care of for you in your budget department, your Office of Sponsored Programs, your Office of Contracts and Grants, whatever you call it, the people you go to in order to deal with your budget and in order to deal with your grant administration. Okay, I was talking about your organization and whether or not that is eligible. So the NHPRC does not and cannot fund federal entities or private for-profit businesses. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Books, websites, there are lots and lots of, for lack of a better term, advice columns about how to write a grant. Absolutely look at those. But more than look at those, call me. Well, email me. Right now, you can call my office and I won't answer. You'll get my voicemail and it will direct you to my email. Email me. Email one of my colleagues. Tell us about your project or if you have a couple, tell us about your projects. Ask for a sample application that is similar. What we will do is we'll talk about the project that you want to include in an application, and we will go through our files and find a similar application in terms of the format or the material, the format of the material or the work processes that you are going to undertake. So if you want to digitize photographs, we will find an application that talks about digitizing photographs. We'll anonymize it a little bit so that you are not getting the resumes of the people who actually made the application, but these are all successful applications that we will send you, and we will send you as much of it as we can without violating anyone's personal identity privileges. Privileges is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Talk to current or former grantees. Well, it doesn't include the project directors' names. There is on our website access to every information about every grant that we have ever made. And if you find one in there that is similar to what you want to do, figure out who ran the project. If it's pretty recent, there should be information on the institution's website. Don't work in a vacuum. Also, don't write in a vacuum. Once you've started writing your narrative, get someone else to read it. Someone in your office who hasn't been working on it. They will see the mistakes. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but when I'm writing, I get so familiar with the material that I make leaps in logic because somehow I'm assuming that everyone knows exactly what I know. And I have to find someone to read for me and remind me that not everybody knows everything that I know about this particular topic or project or whatever it is I'm writing about. Get someone who is not familiar with your project to read your narrative. Submit a draft proposal. That way I can point out those leaps in logic to you. All right, moving on. 4 to 6 weeks to put together an application is reasonable when we're talking about an NHPRC application. We actually often tell potential applicants, and we don't have anything but anecdotal evidence for this, anything under $15,000 in the grants fund request is almost not worth the time that it takes, the cost of the time that it takes to write the proposal. Because it does really take 4 to 6 weeks, particularly if you're in a large organization and you have to get others to work with you in your sponsored program office or your budget office, because they have say over that part of it, and they're not necessarily going to be working on your timeline. So you have to work with them. You have a narrative that you have to write. And if you're going to write a draft, you actually have to start more than 4 to 6 weeks early, because our draft deadline is 2 months before the application deadline. So there are lots of things to take into account, and it's a lot of time. I'm not going to lie. You have to pull together resumes for all of your permanent staff who will be working on the project. You have to have a position description for any project personnel that you want to hire for the project. You need to figure out how much the materials or equipment that you want to purchase during the project are going to cost. It takes time to put all of this together. So once you have all that and you've submitted your application, you actually need another week, because NHPRC, in the middle of the application process, will send you the peer reviewer comments and any staff questions for you to respond to before making its recommendation to the commission. Sorry, I need to pull out the glasses again. Right, Costshare. Costshare is required for every NHPRC program. I am mostly focusing on the NHPRC Access to Historical Records Archival Projects program today. And the application, that program requires a 25% cost share. Most of our applicants meet the cost share requirements through permanent staff time, salary, fringe, and benefits. So however much of your time is going to be spent on the project, whether it is 5 or 20%, how much of your salary and fringe benefits that equates to can be used as cost share. Another thing that a lot of our applicants use for cost share is indirect costs. Your budget office is going to hate us, because we will not allow indirect costs to be part of the grants fund request. In fact, it's in our regulations. And if your budget office doesn't like it, or they want to push it, send them to me. Actually, we had an applicant try and get around this recently by putting their indirect costs under other costs in the budget. So it became a direct cost. The grant fund award recommendation was reduced by that amount. What else do I have to say about indirect costs? The citation, the citation for the regulation where we say we won't allow indirect costs to be used as part of your grant fund request is on the NHPRC budget form. But if your budget office still has problems with it, send them to me, tell them to email me, and I will tell them exactly what I'm telling you right now, is that we won't do it. And we won't do it pursuant to 2 CFR 1600.1. No, I think it's 600.1. Yeah, I have it memorized mostly. Also, we do not negotiate indirect cost rates, but we will accept any federally negotiated indirect cost rate your institution might have, whether that is 12% or 90%. Literally, we have accepted a 90% indirect cost rate. If you do not have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, we will accept a 10% indirect cost rate across the board. It is available there on the budget form for you to select. The other thing to keep in mind is that cost share is a percentage of the total project costs. So if you are asking for the maximum in the Archival Projects program, which is $150,000, you need to come up with $50,000 of cost share at minimum. You can do more. Absolutely, we will allow you to do more, but at minimum, you need to come up with $50,000. Thinking about whether the eligibility, there are levels here. We've already talked about whether or not your institution is eligible based on its designation as a nonprofit or an educational institution or a government entity, non-federal government entity, I should say, or a recognized tribe or Native American group. But is the project eligible? We've talked about this a little bit too. If it is to digitize newspapers, that is not going to be considered eligible. If you want to work with federal records, that is not eligible. There are a couple of other caveats. But you also have to look at what the program itself is asking for. And if your project isn't doing any of those things, and in the case of archival projects, that means converting descriptions so that they can be made available online, processing and creating new description of material, or digitizing material to be made available online, then the application will not be eligible. At least one of those things must be happening in the project in order for the application to be eligible. And do you have all of the required elements of the application? That means the project narrative, the budget on the NHPRC budget form, and the supplementary materials, which requires CVs for permanent personnel who are included in the budget, as well as position descriptions for any project personnel that you might want to hire. All right, I'm going to stop here and see if anybody has any questions.
Not seeing anything in the chat, Nancy, but we'll give it a minute in case anyone's typing.
Okay, yeah. Okay, hearing no questions, we'll move on. Oh, wait.
This is what always happens. Let's see. Right this second, it's okay. So does your institution have to be the one with the DUNS number, or can you use your personal one?
Oh, that's tricky because one of the things that NHPRC does not do by regulation is fund people, individuals. Um, so an individual as an applicant will not be considered eligible. I would encourage your institution to get a DUNS number if they don't have one. That is going to be the easiest workaround. And if you do it right now, you have time since the next application deadline isn't until October. Because the DUNS number has to match the applicant and it will get kicked back to us if it doesn't.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah, we can go ahead.
Okay. All right. You have gone through everything to this point. You've worked with your budget office. You have put together your application and you've had somebody else, including us, hopefully, because anecdotally, we've never actually studied this, but you are more likely to have a competitive application if one of us has read your draft and commented on it. So everything's ready, you think. Double check it all, please. Make sure that you're using a 12-point type and that you have standard margins. Make sure that you have everything that you're supposed to have in the supplemental materials. Have somebody read it for grammar. I actually used to read, and I do still on occasion, read things that I write if they're longer than a couple of paragraphs, frankly, backwards from the end, sentence by sentence, to make sure that I didn't actually skip any words. And that everything, each sentence in and of itself makes sense. Double check your math. Make sure that the numbers at the end of your budget form match the numbers in your application cover sheets. Right. In addition to making leaps of logic about your project itself, you can sometimes end up making leaps of logic about your institution or your archival repository. Because you know it, you assume everybody else knows it. Make sure that the information that is being asked for in the narrative is in your narrative. So for the Archival Projects program, in the narrative, in the announcement, we ask that the narrative include information on your archival repository, including the extent of its holdings. And if you have a backlog, how much reference how often you provide reference every year, when your reference, when your reading room is open. Is it open to the public? If it's not open to the public, we may have a problem. You have to open it to the public. And whether your stacks are secure. Do they have Well, let's leave it at whether they're secure. All of that information is actually asked for in the announcement. It can be addressed in a single paragraph, and a fairly short one at that. But remember to include it, please. It will make the reviewer's job easier to figure out whether or not you are in a position to actually undertake the project you want to do. Because one of the things we don't do anymore is fund startup projects. We no longer will fund new emerging programs, let me put it that way. Research value of the collections. This one can be a little tricky. It is something we ask for in the announcement. How is expanded access to the collections that are included in your project going to expand our understanding of US history and culture? I have an example that I like to address because we're looking for how the informational content of the collection is going to expand our understanding of US history and culture. So George Washington, before he was a soldier, was actually a surveyor. And he spent probably 6 years surveying the western portions of Pennsylvania and Virginia. The value of that collection for NHPRC is the earliest instance of westward expansion and the growth of surveying as a profession, not that it was George Washington. Name dropping is not going to get you funded. We don't really care who created the collection. We want to know what it is inside the collection that will help us better understand how we got to where we are. By the same token, unfortunately, records that exist everywhere, like vital statistics, birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, I have yet to see an argument that will successfully make that leap to these records need to be made more available. Generally, that's also governed by state policies and records management regulations. So looking at that as well can make it difficult, because a lot of times what an entity wants to do is digitize them and make them available. But for privacy considerations, they can't do that after, say, 1957. And I'm literally pulling that year out of the air. So it won't help the county needs to not be able to digitize anything after 1957, but we can't fund anything that doesn't make the material available online in some way. So there are some limited formats that I have yet to see a successful application make that argument for.
We have a question in the chat, Nancy, if you'd like to take that.
Sure.
So the question is, if you can show that a collection has an impact on the state or region, is that good enough, or does the impact have to be national?
The impact does have to be national, but I will say this, it's not hard. Well, I don't think it's hard to do. I could be wrong. that's one of the reasons I included the Oklahoma City application in the Think Like a Reviewer portion of our day, because that application successfully made that leap from local to national. It linked what was happening on the local level to what was happening nationally. There are ways to think on a more national level with your project. And if you're having problems with it, there are people to turn to. A subject area specialist at a local university, if you're not already in a university. Look at the publications by researchers that you know have used the collection and have referenced it in their work. What were they talking about? Were they talking on a national? I can help you sometimes figure out that linkage when we talk about your project and the collections that you want to include. Again, if you're not working in a vacuum, there are many resources available to you in order to help you make the best argument and most competitive application you can. Do not think you have to do this all on your own. Oh, don't be greedy. Please don't ask for a $50,000 book eye if what you really need is a $1,000 Epson. Our reviewers will comment on it, the staff will comment on it, and the commission will say something along the lines of, we agree this project should be funded, but we're not going to give them money for a $50,000 book eye because they don't need it for this project. Something to keep in mind is that federal regulations actually allow for funding agencies to take possession of any piece of equipment over either $5,000 or $10,000 at the end of a project. NHPRC has never done that, but that's not to say it won't. So if you do ask for and get the $50,000 book eye, you may not get to keep it. Plus, we are trying to fund as many projects as we possibly can. And if you are reasonable in your request, that is one more linkage to your fellow repositories that we may be able to fund. I already talked about spell check and proofreading and double checking your math. And here is where I repeat my statement. Please do not wait until the last minute. This year, the application deadline is 11:59 p.m. on October 6th. Do not wait until 11 o'clock on October 6th to submit your application. If you have problems, there will be no one around for you to ask help from. I don't actually know what the hours for the grants.gov help desk are, but there won't be anybody in my office to help you. So please, I beg of you, and whatever entity you may pray to, do not wait until the last minute. Do it earlier in the week. That way it's done and you don't have to worry about it. You're not up against a deadline that is hard and fast. It is. Can you tell I feel a little worked up about this? Okay. What happens next? It's mostly out of your hands. So Actually, it won't start on October 7th because at that point we are getting ready for our next commission meeting. But sometime in the month after you have submitted your application, someone on NHPRC staff will read through all of the applications to ensure their eligibility. That is to make sure that the applicant itself is eligible, that the project is undertaking at least one of the activities that is included in the program, and that all of the required elements of the application are there. And we will send out emails to everyone, either telling them that they are not eligible or saying, we are eligible, you are eligible, you'll hear from us in a couple of months, 3 months maybe. What we do then is put everything together in panels of 3 to 5 applications. We are looking for proposals with similarities, whether that's format, you're all talking about AV material, time period. They're all about First World War personal collections, or they are all from dealing with similar, or they're all from museums and want to work with the museum's institutional collections. Once they are all paneled, we start looking for reviewers, and we aim to have 5 to 7 peer reviewers for every panel. Every reviewer has the same questions, the questions that you saw in preparation for the application, in preparation for today. And we will give the reviewers anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks to complete their reviews. Although frankly, the last time I gave them all 8 weeks, 3 people finished them before the 3-week mark. And then they started rolling in, and most of them came in the last 2 weeks. So I may not give anybody 8 weeks anymore. But again, if any of you are interested in being a reviewer, I would be happy to put you on my potential reviewer list.
We do have some volunteers, Nancy, I noted, so I'll follow up with you after.
Yes,
So
you
thumbs
guys
up.
make me so happy. Pardon me for a minute. You're fine. Come here. See, you're fine. Now go away. Somebody needed some attention. All right, where are we? Peer reviewers. Reviewers give us feedback, and then what happens is about 2 months. Oh yeah, there she is. About 2 months before the commission meets. So the commission meets in May and November. So in late February, early March, every applicant will hear from me and will be sent the reviewer comments that they've been anonymized, the names have been taken off of them, as well as any questions that the staff may have on the application. And you have an opportunity, we'll give you about 10 days to respond, to clarify anything that the reviewers were confused about, to submit a revised budget or work plan, or even to withdraw the application if you feel like the changes that need to be made are too big to make in 10 days. The withdrawal is a simple email to me, and it's in the cover letter with the comments that you can withdraw. If you do withdraw, the commission will know that you applied, but they will never see the application. Okay, and then there's more silence until after, when you send in your response, NHPRC staff will acknowledge that they have received your response, and they will tell you, you'll hear from us after the commission meeting. In fact, the commission meeting for May is on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. So our current applicants will hear from us after that meeting. Once we have your responses, if you choose to go that route, what happens is that all the program officers sit down and we write essentially what amounts to an executive summary of the entire application package. The application itself, the peer reviewer comments, and your response to those comments and staff questions, if there were any. We compare notes, we make recommendations as to whether to fund or not, and whether to fund at the requested amount or not. And if not the requested amount, how much to fund. Sometimes it actually even goes up. It doesn't always go down. We put those recommendations in front of our bosses and they review it. And then we put those recommendations in front of the commission. This is what the commission will be doing on Tuesday. They will be reviewing our recommendations. They have access to our executive summary, as well as the entire application packet, your application, the peer reviewer comments, your response. And they make a recommendation to the archivist. The Archivist of the United States has the final say. I have never seen the Archivist of the United States not follow the commission's recommendations. I have, however, seen the commission make a different recommendation from the staff. So we were almost done. You submitted your application in October. It is now May, and we are almost done. Once the commission meeting is over, it is my favorite part of the job, contacting an applicant and saying, congratulations, the commission has recommended funding for your project. I also have to do the other part of the job, which is contacting the people who were not successful in their application and explain to them why. All of this right now is happening via email. And then we start the offer process, but we're going to talk about that after we actually talk about thinking like a reviewer. I think this would be a good point to take, what time is it? 10:30. Yeah, I've been talking for an hour straight. A good point to take a break before we start thinking like a reviewer.
We have a few questions if you'd like to do that and then take a break.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Very good. Okay, let's see. Our first question is, let me just scroll up a little. So if a $50,000 Buckeye is paid for by the institution, could that cover the shared costs?
Yes, if it is literally part of the project. If you already have one and you have had it for, say, 6 months, that probably won't fly. But if it is part of what the institution is going to purchase for the project and future projects, absolutely.
Great. And then another question is, if you withdraw because you think it will take too much time to revise, can you resend the next cycle with those revisions?
Absolutely. And in fact, I will be happy to work with you on that.
Good, good. And then our last question is, who comprises the commission?
The commission is a 15-member body. The Archivist of the United States is the chair. It has members appointed from federal agencies, right, which are departments of state and defense, the Library of Congress, the federal judiciary, as well as a representative from the Senate and from the House of Representatives. There are 2 presidential appointees, and then there are representatives from professional organizations. Those are the Society of American Archivists, the National Association of Government Records Managers and Archivists, and I messed that up, I'm sorry, NAGARA, the American Association for State and Local History, as well as the Association of Documentary Editors, the Organization of American Historians, and the the American History Association. I would give you names, but they change on a regular basis. And in fact, I think right now about half the commission is more or less brand new.
Is there a place online where the commissioners are listed?
Yes, there is. There on the NHPRC website, there is a box that is entitled About NHPRC, and that will give you a link to our authorizing legislation, to our regulations, as well as to the names of the commissioners and the names and contact information for the staff.
Great. I can go ahead and look for that link in the break and pop it in the chat for everyone. Okay.
Terrific.
That's all our questions. So thank you, Nancy. We can go ahead and take a
Absolutely.
break.
Yeah, why don't we take a 10-minute break? Does that sound good?
Sounds good. I will pause the recording. So we will come back at then 9:50.
Yep.
All right.
And we're going to talk about you're getting funded. Yay! I have sent you the email that says congratulations. I'll be in touch with more information later. Here's the more information part. So the NHPRC has an offer and award process. When you are recommended by the commission for funding, that is not an automatic, we're just going to write you a check now and here you go. There is a process through which we have to go before we can actually process the award documentation. So the offer process starts like this. I send you an email that outlines the steps that we both have to take before I can process the award documentation. That includes a financial capability survey, which will document for us that your institution will keep the appropriate records for costs incurred during the project. Your cost share, your time, the time and work of any project personnel that you're going to hire. And believe it or not, we are going to require you to do one of these capability surveys for every project that we fund, even if you had one just last year. You did one just last year because we funded a project last year. We are going to ask you to do another one. And since that is not necessarily in your hands, if you are in a university or a larger institutional setting, that is going to be in your budget office hands. It may take a little while to get done. The other thing we are going to do, you and I, as you project director and me as staff person, is negotiate your performance objectives. Now, you have put some performance objectives that you think are reasonable in your application, and those are a good starting point. But those aren't always, complete, or measurable. The thing to understand about our process is that at the end of everything, we have to report, excuse me. Oh, there we go. It's clear now. At the end of your project, we have to report whether or not it was successful. And the way we measure success is against your performance objectives. So if you are, if your project is processing 300 linear feet and digitizing 100 photographs within that collection, those are the measurements we're going to use. The performance objectives for that would be processing 300 linear feet, writing a description and making that description available on your website through Archives Grid, whatever other I just lost the word. Whatever other entity you might post your finding aids to, creating catalog records and making those available through OCLC, as well as your own OPAC. Digitizing 100 photographs, posting those photographs on your website, maybe making them available through links in the finding aid. If compatible, making those available for harvest by DPLA, or say you're in Georgia, the Digital Library of Georgia, or the Online Archive of California, or Calisphere, whatever super institutional access points are available. That will be our performance objective. Digitizing the photographs, making available the photographs through your website as well as through DPLA if that's applicable. We will also ask you to make quantifiable how you will do publicity for this. You are going to write a social media post once a month, or you're going to send out press releases and host a symposium. You are going to write articles for newsletters. Maybe submit, if you're doing something that's a little different and you want to make it your workflows available to the profession, submit session proposals. We don't, there's no way the performance objectives need to be in your control as a repository. So there's no way we can write a performance objective that is present at X, Y, and Z conferences or X number of conferences. Submit proposals to? Absolutely. Because whether or not you present is not in your hands. That is in the hands of the program committee. But you can submit proposals to any conference you want. All right. What else do I have to say about this? So there is a possibility that you will also have to revise your budget and or your work plan based on whatever the commission has recommended. Those will also have to be completed before I can process the award. Once all of this information, all of these pieces of paper are finished and have been approved by whoever has to approve them, and we've agreed on the performance objectives, then I can process, then I can process the award. Do I talk about this here? Or do I talk about this next? Oh, no, I talk about it here. Okay. So the award will contain a formal award document. It will also contain, excuse me, a reporting schedule. For most NHPRC grants, we ask you to send us a narrative report on how the work is going twice a year, and a financial report once a year. One of the reasons for the financial report is because we don't actually just write you a check. We ask you to submit requests for reimbursement or advancement to access your funds. And we do this for a couple of reasons. One, because more or less the IG said so. The other one is because whatever funds you don't spend, whether that is 2 cents or $400 or $10,000, because the server you wanted ended up being cheaper than you expected it to be, we roll that money back into our pot of funds available to distribute. So we can use anything that you don't spend to fund another project, which is why we don't just write you a check the way, say, Mellon does. And I forgot what I was originally talking about. What was I originally talking about? Oh, right. So the reason it takes a couple of weeks for the award documentation to be completed is because once I have finished the award documentation, it actually has to go to a couple of other places within the National Archives to set up the accounting lines so that you can make the request and we can push those funds out to you. All right. Now we
have a question, Nancy, if you'd like to take that at the moment.
That is a perfect time to take a question now.
Great.
Yes.
So does NHPRC allow for no-cost extensions of grants if you don't quite finish everything in the anticipated time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, we do that. I will say within reason. The no-cost extension cannot be for more than a year at a time, although in the interesting times in which we are living now, we will do up to a year at a time, but we have been doing more than one of those for some of our grants because the public portions of their project just simply cannot be completed under the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So yes, absolutely no cost extensions can be requested, and as long as it is to complete the work that you said you were going to do in the first place, and you don't want to do something else just in order to spend any extra funds that you may not have spent yet, it's more or less an automatic yes.
Thank you. Great. That's our, yep, that's our only question.
Okie dokie. All right, so now that I have talked entirely too long, possibly, maybe not to you, but sometimes it feels like it to me, about the NHPRC application and award process, we're going to step back a little bit and start thinking about where to start in designing your own project for grant funding. Now, I've been talking about the Access to Archival Projects, Access to Historical Records, Archival Projects program all morning long. These are the specifics of that program. The maximum award is $150,000. The maximum time you can ask for to spend that $150,000, if that's what you need, is 2 years. You do not have to ask for $150,000 and 2 years. You can ask for whatever it is you need up to those 2 limits. So if you only need 1 year and you only need $75,000, ask for that. Do not ask for the maximum just because that's what the maximum is. I had a colleague who is no longer with the NHPRC who would regularly decide that the applicant didn't actually need 18 months to undertake the processing project that they were talking about, because based on his experience as a processing archivist and as a processing archivist supervisor, and based on the workflows they had discussed in their project, they really only needed 15 months, or they really only needed a year. And so he would reduce the amount of time recommended for projects that were in his purview. I don't do that terribly often, but if you're asking for more than I think you need, I will question you about it. And then depending on your response, either accept what you're asking for or reduce or increase your grant funds award accordingly.
Yeah.
So this is just sort of a random bit of information. While I cannot address how many awards there are going to be this year yet, we did get 28 applications, 25 of which are going to the commission for consideration next week. Last year, we got 20 applications and made 10 awards in this. And here I'm talking solely about the Archival Projects program. We got 20 applicants, or rather, I should say the commission considered 20 applications in this program and made 10 awards for a total of $760,235. In fiscal year 2019, the commission considered 30 applications and made 14 awards totaling $1,022,540. I can't tell if that's a 3 or an 8. Let's say 8, $48,000. So this particular program has between 40 and 50% success rate for its applicants, which is pretty good. Not all of our programs are this. Well, let me make that statement in the reverse. Some of our programs are more competitive than this one is. Okay, now that I've talked about a little bit about this program, let's start looking at.
We had a quick question, Nancy. Someone's wondering if the funding amount was affected by the COVID pandemic.
Funding amount is not affected by pandemic, has not been affected by pandemic. Funding amount is, well, let me say this, the amount of funding we have available for making awards has not been affected by the pandemic.
Sorry, it looks like maybe I misunderstood the question. It was they were thinking more about the amount of people applying. I think it was affected by the pandemic.
You know, it's funny. I think we had more applications withdraw last year because of the pandemic. The commission only considered 20. I'm fairly sure we had closer to 30 applications come in the previous October. But a lot of our applicants, no, I shouldn't say a lot, but some of our applicants decided they did not have the capacity to process a response to the peer review comments and our questions because of the pandemic, because really that part of the application process happened literally as everything shut down in the middle of March, the beginning to middle of March of last year. I think by August, September, October, when the applications came in that are being considered next week, people had figured out how to do the job that they wanted to do, undertake the projects that they wanted to undertake in a pandemic setting. I will say that the peer reviewers commented on the applications in that light as well, asking questions about how they were going to protect health and safety, where personal protection equipment would be needed and who would be supplying it, whether it would be out of grant funds or if that was part of what their institution would be supplying just on an across the board basis. Those sorts of questions came up and were addressed by our applicants. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think that does. Thank you, Nancy. Yes.
Great. Okay. So coming back to the 30 to 40,000 foot view of the forest and what I think you as members of your organization should be thinking about in order to find the projects that would be most beneficial, that would benefit most from grant funding. Now, remember I talked about how it has to be an established archival program. It doesn't have to be, well established, but there should be an archivist or someone who takes that role and has some experience with archival archival work, I guess best said. Other things that the reviewers and us as staff members and the commission will be looking for is a logical work plan. Again, it doesn't have to be logical in terms of best practices, but explain why it isn't best. You're not operating with best practices as they are currently considered to be best practices, because best practices changes over time. A cost-effective budget, and we've talked about that. Established workflows, we have talked a little bit about. This is the baseline from which you are working. Now, how to identify the projects that you may need grant funding for? Do you have a processing backlog? I know most of us do. I know the National Archives does. Are there collections that are in such high demand that digitizing them would make them available to more users. Do you have analog descriptive material that needs to be made online? Would that make access to your records easier for your constituencies? Do you feel the need to do I looked up this term yesterday. Reparative retrospective description for your collections? Are there collections that you think users would want, but they can't get to you? So you need to find another way to make those collections available. Do you have AV material that is disintegrating before your eyes and you want to digitize it in order to save it before it is completely lost to the world forever? These are the questions to ask while you are putting together your projects list. So once you've answered all of these questions, you have a list of projects that you want to get done. Which one do you want to do next? I won't say first because they are, frankly, all equally important. So take that list of projects that you have, and in a few minutes, I'm going to ask that we turn off the recording, not yet, and we can talk about those amongst ourselves. Take that list of projects and start looking at the funding opportunities that are available to see which one of those projects meshes with the funding opportunities that are available. Do not look for the funding opportunities first. I mean, keep them in mind, but do not design your project to fit the opportunity. I know I've said this earlier today, but if you design the project to fit the opportunity, the likelihood is high that you will end up with a product that doesn't work for you. Okay, let's see. Now that we've established our list of projects, let's figure out what you need. Do you need a project archivist because you don't have quite enough people in order to get all of the processing work done? Do you need interns because you want to do reparative review of your existing finding aids? Do you need supplies? Do you need buffered folders? Do you need archival boxes? Do you need Mylar sleeves, gloves? What equipment do you need? Computers for the project archivist and the interns, scanners. What software do you need? How much of your own time can you provide to this project? And don't say all of it, because the question that will inevitably be asked is, who's going to do your regular job while you're working on this? It's a balancing act for you, as I'm assuming all of you are going to be project directors. It's a balancing act for you as a project director. And if you're going to be using, say, more than 40% of your time on a project, explain why this isn't going to impact negatively your regular duties, or that how your regular duties are going to be covered while you are spending this time. Are there others on your staff who can spend a little bit of their time on this project? Somebody from your publicity department, somebody from IT, if you're going to need help with bulk uploading of digital surrogates, or if you want to stand up a new instance of Archivaria. Is there another repository that you can work with on this? Do they have related collections? Do they have a digitization lab and you don't? And you don't have the personnel or the space to keep a blah, 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 digitization lab running after the project ends. You don't have to set up a digitization lab for every project. This is where vendors come in handy, particularly if you're dealing with AV materials. You don't have to be an audiovisual museum in order and maintain all playback machines for all of the different types of video that are available, or all of the different types of audio recording that are available. That is what vendors are for. Or that is what your colleagues down the road are for. Particularly if they have the equipment, but not the capacity to administer their own grant project, and they have related materials. You can all work together and get everything put up online together. Okay, so we are moving on to the resources portion of this workshop. I lost that word for a minute. NHPRC links. These are the URLs for the pages on our website that I have talked about today. The landing page is where you can get to any of our pages. What we fund and do not fund is available at the eligibility link. All of our programs are available through our announcement page, and the application instructions that go along with those announcements is available at Apply. Also, if you haven't followed us on Facebook, follow us on Facebook. We would appreciate it. And our director for communications publishes these really cool vignettes every day about something that we have funded, or from something we have funded. And again, I will be sending each of you a copy of the slides so that you don't have to be furiously scribbling down these URLs. Other federal granting agencies for archives and museums, IMLS and NEH, both have programs that might fit your needs better than ours do. For instance, NEH has programs for individual researchers. They also have programs that for archival processing that don't make a national significance argument a requirement in its review process. And I'm fairly sure they don't have any cost share requirements for some of their programs, if that is a hurdle for you. Where to find information about non-federal grants. You can go to Mellon MacArthur Pew directly to see if they have something. CLEAR, the Council on Information and Library Resources, has grant programs that are funded through Mellon and MacArthur, I think, MacArthur, for sure Mellon. And then go to the Foundation Center or the nonprofit FAQ to find information possibly about regional grant making entities, private entities, that foundations that could assist your work. Last slide. This is me. This is how to get a hold of me. NHPRC nancy.melly@nara.gov. I want to thank you all for your time and attention. Some of you got up very, very early this morning, and thank you for that. You are much better people than I, because I hate getting up. And luckily for me, my dog is not a morning dog, so I don't have to get up at 5:30 anymore in order to walk a dog. And look at that, 10 minutes to spare. We have 10 minutes, so if there are any other questions, I would be happy to answer them. Lily, do we have any other questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but I'll stop the recording just so if anyone does have questions, but I just want to say thank you so much, Nancy. This has been such a fantastic presentation. We're so delighted that we're going to be able to share it after. So it will be widely accessible, which is a value of NHPRC. So thank you again, Nancy, for presenting this for us.
You all are very welcome. I'm getting some requests to see Eloise, so I'm going to have to move the computer in order to accommodate that request. Ellie, come here. Where are you? Are you in this shot? Yeah, a little bit. You're not moving? Okay, fine. Okay, fine. So that's Eloise. She's being very lazy now that she's barked at everything that needed to be barked at. And thank you. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Do not hesitate to contact me via this email address when you're ready to talk about whatever project you have in mind. However sketchy that might be, we can set up a Zoom chat or a video link